Welcome to the 66th episode of Dialogika, a podcast between two friends about the latest in politics, society, and feminism in Indonesia and the world. I'm Sweden Lee, and this week Stephanie is out because, believe it or not, she had to go through an emergency root canal this past weekend, and suffice to say, she cannot speak right now, which is a problem for an audio podcast. So she's out for this week, but we're excited. I'm super excited to have a former guest of the podcast, Andhyta Firselly Utami, better known as Afu, on this episode. And we're going to be talking about the recent vice presidential debate that just happened. Longtime listeners, you might know Afu from her YouTube channel with her husband Wikan called Frame and Sentences. Go check out their YouTube channel. We'll link it in our show page. Also, check out our episode where we talk to both Afu and Wikan about the work they're doing with that YouTube channel. But yeah, Afu's based in Indonesia right now, and I'm excited to talk to her about Ma'ruf Amin's performance, Sandiaga Uno's performance, and really dig deep into some of the policies, but also, what this debate and the kind of political conversation is around the presidential elections. So, without further ado, here's to it. Alright, so obviously I'm very excited to have you in this episode, Afu. I'm pretty sure for most of our listeners who've been paying attention to Dialogika, they've probably heard of you and of Frame and Sentences, but for those who don't know you, can you just give a little bit of a refresher of who you are and what you're up to these days?
Sure. Hi everyone, my name is Afu. I'm currently a researcher for an international organization. I also have a YouTube channel where I talk about social and political issues, which is probably the reason why Sweden decided to call me in for this podcast.
I mean, honestly, I think, you're one of the smartest people I know, and you definitely have really great insights, not only about Indonesian politics, but just about the world. So any chance to bring you in, I'm always game for.
I hope so. I'm happy to be here.
Well, thank you for making the time, and I guess we'll just go straight into it. Obviously, the vice presidential debate happened just this past Sunday. For those of you who weren't tuning in, Ma'ruf Amin and Sandiaga Uno were debating on their own this time and talking about specific topics such as education, health, human resources, social issues, and culture. Afu, what do you think, and how do you think they performed?
Yeah, I joined this kind of watch together event in Jakarta, and I honestly had very low expectations on Pak Ma'ruf Amin and very high expectations on Sandiaga Uno. I know people, based on the first debate where Pak Ma'ruf Amin was next to Jokowi and did not perform very well, did not add too much value to what Jokowi was already saying. So I had really low expectations on, how he would answer very specific issues and, issue where there has been a lot of policy. So you really need to know kind of what has been going on in the field, what are, some of the policy acronyms and jargons and all of that. And I wonder if Pak Ma'ruf Amin can keep up to that, knowing that he did not come from necessarily, traditional political policy background, whereas Sandiaga Uno, I had high expectations because some people saw that he performed quite well in the very first debate, and he's also known as this, businessman slash, people who have been working on the economic sector, presumably know more on the issues of jobs and human resources. So coming from that expectation, I think the result or the whole process of the debate had flipped my expectations. Like the outcome is the opposite, where Pak Ma'ruf Amin actually exceeded my expectations. I can see that I think his performance is kind of proof that their camp, Jokowi and Ma'ruf Amin's camp, actually had kind of some of the best advisors and trainers, or whomever's been training Ma'ruf Amin behind scene, have done a really good job in terms of, prepping him about some of the issues and the kind of priorities, the agenda that the, innovation and programs that have been implemented during Jokowi's first term. And he framed it really well on how he wanted to take it, or his administration, if they get elected, will take it to the next level. Whereas Sandiaga Uno is stuck, I think, in the same narrative of this bootless in Sragen. and I have to say failed to really, robustly criticize what's been missing from the current administration. Whereas, as a development worker / policy analyst, I know for sure, even though there are many progresses, there's also issues on the ground on how what Jokowi and Yusuf Kala have done, in this term. There are some very valid criticism that can be thrown that Camp O2 failed to bring up in the debate. So I should say that I was quite happy with Pak Ma'ruf Amin's performance and not so much on Sandiaga.
I mean, that's fascinating, right? Because I think certainly, at least for me, when I first heard that Ma'ruf Amin was going to be Jokowi's vice presidential candidate, there was definitely a lot of discussion especially amongst the youth, I think, in Indonesia, where they were skeptical, I would say, whether or not somebody like Ma'ruf Amin would be able to touch on those specific topics, especially knowing that Jokowi is really good at touching on his own topics. Like he knows his stuff, right? Can Ma'ruf Amin bring credibility and also bring his own, I guess, perspective into it?
Yeah, and I don't know if I think that the strategy, each camp strategy is very different. I think maybe Sandiaga Uno's camp thinks that, the people who will be watching are not policy experts, or like the audience that they're appealing to wouldn't care or wouldn't really know the big picture situation on these issues. Whereas Ma'ruf Amin, I think, really prepped for people like me who actually know, the implementation of some of the issues, knows that stunting is a really huge issue.
Yes.
It's almost like they're talking to a very different audience. If you open like Twitter accounts of people who are supporting Prabowo and Sandiaga Uno, you would see that they all praise him for being this great speaker and it was a really great performance and all that. So it's like, they have very different benchmark almost to assess what's good and bad during the debate, right? Almost like during, Trump and Hillary's speech, debates. Previously, I know that each side takes very different lessons or they perceive very different performances from both candidates, depending on what their biases are.
And I think, it actually speaks a lot about how debates work and how campaigning works, right? Like for neutrals or, for observers, they might think like, this is supposed to be a space on a platform where two candidates can really talk about policy, but sometimes it's not really talking about policy, right? It's talking to your base, to impressionable voters, whatever. It's whatever you want your target to be. But it's hard to strike that balance where you're not only talking to your base and, touching on specific campaign points, but also proving to, as you said, people like you who are in the space, that you know what you're talking about. And you think that Ma'ruf Amin did better on that front?
I would say so. And especially this topic, right? The topic of human capital is a very big, important topic. And I was kind of worried about, whether Ma'ruf Amin can really deliver. Because, people are probably familiar for Jokowi's administration. The first term, he's been kind of framing or planning it to be a hardware period where he deals with the infrastructure. So the problem of this really physical, buildings and roads and all of that. He has been speaking about making his second term about the software, which is the humans, right? The human capital. Whether you can have smart people who are healthy, who have the, protected jobs and all of that. So this is a very critical issue when it comes to knowing what Jokowi's next plan is. And Ma'ruf Amin talked about the 10-year challenge, which is not the 10 years as we know it on social media, but the 10-year challenge is demographic dividend, right? This demographic bonus that we will have and whether Indonesia can reap it, which will really rely on how we perform on eradicating or lowering our stunting number and how we reform our education system and all of that. So the fact that Ma'ruf Amin, managed to not master, but at least, familiarize himself in an informed, or have been informing himself enough on kind of the statistics on how, stunting has gone down from 37% to 31%, and all these different cards that Jokowi has as a kind of social assistance on education and food and all of that is kind of fascinating. Again, it's kind of impressive. The kind of people who watch the debates are also, I think, the nerds among the nerdier part of the society. So in a way, you do want to talk to this audience, right? Who knows their stuff, and you want to appeal to them, because I doubt that people in the grassroots would watch the debate. They would watch clips of the debate that, part of the campaign would cherry pick on. Oh, this part is great. I will cut this part and share it on WhatsApp. And that's how people get, parts of the debate, but not as a whole. But the people who watch the whole debate are actually the ones who I think at least are more informed about the policy scene, or at least, care enough to learn more, or can tell whether someone is just bluffing or actually know their stuff.
So this is actually something I'm really fascinated by, because you're probably right, people like you, people like me, either politics junkies or policies junkies, we love watching this kind of stuff, right? We love hearing about the candidate's perspective. Did you get the sense, with you being based in Indonesia, did you get the sense that even though the people watching might be people who are already interested in these kind of topics, is there still a sense that there's a bigger population that now wants to watch, as opposed to maybe like in previous presidential campaigns where the policy side of things might not be as compelling?
Yeah, I think I can't speak to the entire population, but at least for the youth and the urban youth, maybe more specifically, I think there's more interest this time around compared to previous election years, just because, there's a lot of media that focus their content on young people, including those who are not conventional media, including like podcasts like yours and like YouTube channels
like yours,
and all that, or like
like YouTube channels like yours.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm also thinking about Tirto, Asumsi, and this kind of media. So with this media, they almost can't ignore the debate, right? Because like if you're just online, even though your television is not on and you're just online, people on social media are talking about the debate. So it's kind of hard to avoid. You kind of, if you want to engage in the conversation, you kind of need to watch it. You have more incentive to follow the debate, even if you just want to produce a meme or understand what people are talking about, right? So I think in the urban youth demographics, there's more incentive or interest now to watch the debate, even though I'm not quite sure how people whether people change their minds upon watching it, but at least they can participate or can get a little bit more exposed to what the ways, the approach, the values of the candidates are when they talk in the debate. And I took this class in my master's, during my master's, which talks about running for office essentially, and they talk about how debates are essentially the main function is to signal values, right? Yeah. And characters. So people don't really care about the details, unlike me probably. People don't really care about details of whatever, but people care about for Sandi's benefit, for example, how he's been polite to the elder person, right? How he talks about his wife and so this makes him a good family man. And I for some people it's also about that. So not necessarily kind of the policy wonk debate, but the characters, whether you would want to hang out with this guy. If he's not a presidential candidate, would you want to hang out with Sandiaga Uno as a human being, or would you rather hang out with Ma'ruf Amin? These kind of questions or images, I think, pop up in people's head when they watch the debate, and maybe less about the real policy stuff.
That's definitely true, and as somebody who comes from that sort of like political campaigning background, that's definitely something we talk about on the regular. How do you make this person personable. And certainly, I think one of Sandy's strengths across everyone is that he's very charming. He has that within him. That's definitely something I know, that the fact that he was very polite to Ma'ruf Amin, which I think is very important for that camp in order to, make sure that Sandy is as inoffensive as possible, knowing that Prabowo has a lot of baggage on his end.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, it's an interesting point, right, about there's more interest now in the policies, even if it's just because you need to be in the loop in terms of the conversation online and offline. I think I'm just starting to think about this right now. I think our generation is a generation that has grown up with Jokowi's first term, with sort of like this coming of age of Indonesian democracy, where it's slowly, very slowly, transitioning out of the vestiges of the old guard, of the people who've been in politics for decades, for generations, and now we're trying to see a different future, and we're trying to participate in it. I don't know, maybe I'm being a little bit naive and hopeful, but I feel like there's a certain like swelling of interest in politics from the youth. Obviously it might still be the urban youth, but there is still an interest that I would say even like, 10 years ago, I feel like there wouldn't be something like that.
Yeah, I think what I believe is that young people are craving for these, role models, leaders who inspire them, to use the very overused term, but, how politics can educate and inspire, and they can really show that positive change can happen. And I think in the past 5 years, we've seen a lot of really top of the... they've kind of flipped this understanding that politics must be corrupt and all that. All these local leaders from Ahok and Jokowi, and we know Burisma, and there's Ridwan Kamil, even though there's some issues with him. But in general, you've heard this new local champions that are bringing change to the government and how the government works, right? And I think this kind of optimism, right, that young people are after, are kind of represented by these local champions. I just hope that the momentum continues to build, right? And we keep having great local candidates. And not to mention the legislative election is also really important. And I know that in that space, there's less people who are interested to talk about it because it's less, like A versus B and, this is my champion versus your champion. So maybe there's less traction to talk about that. And there's more confusion because there's so many candidates that you have to research on. But, I think the momentum is there, and I think we need to keep it, but also try to expand it so that it's not just about the president, but also kind of local champions, local leaders, and the parliamentary members, right?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. It's not an insignificant thing that for the first time, both the presidential and the parliamentary elections are all happening at the same time. And I think it's good for our democracy. I think, it's good to get people interested in all levels of politics because, as you said, it's not, national level politics is obviously the most exciting, the most dramatic, but local level politics is also incredibly important and oftentimes the most tangible in terms of its results, right? Like, you can think about national policies, but sometimes it's the local policies that really affect change at a tangible level. Speaking about this as well, I think I'm curious about your thoughts because I think in light of the optimism from the youth, there's also obviously a growing sense of increasing conservatism, increasing, I want to say, radicalism in terms of perspectives and, pushing people towards extremes where they can't find common ground. Like, how do you think about that when you see like, the youth might be excited about progressive values, but then I feel like we're getting this pushback from the other side of the camp who wants to be much more insular, much more conservative.
Yeah, I think that's what's really interesting, right? When we talk about young people or the more that people have been overusing millennial.
Yeah.
Many politicians frame their policy as a millennial policy, whatever, millennial this, millennial that. But really, think about millennials, we're thinking of this urban young people, right, who are on their phones, live in Jakarta, exposed to, I don't know, quote unquote, Western news, like international content. But we're not inclusive in thinking about the young people, right? Because there's no, young people can't be put in one bucket, right? There are the conservatives, there are people who live in the more rural parts of Indonesia. There are progressive young people in the rural areas, but also they have different social ecosystem, let's say, right? That maybe promotes a different kind of value and all of that. So I think, again, it's true that we can see that in general, young people want to participate more or engage in the conversation more because of this optimistic new wave of positive change led by some political leaders. But I definitely agree that there's an active effort, very organized effort in the grassroots through, I don't know, WhatsApp groups, certain boarding schools and whatnot, where the leaders of this school or leaders, sometimes religious leaders of this religion-based groups, I guess, or it doesn't have to be religious, but all sorts of social groups in the grassroots kind of promotes a very different value, and they use hoax, they use all sorts of lies. You've probably heard about the firehouse of falsehood, right?
Yeah.
Tries to bring some of the young people to the other side. So I definitely think that both are happening at the same time, and it's I don't know whose job it is, but it's someone's job to really draw the line where it's just a difference in value of, because people have the right to be conservative and have their values, but where do you draw the line where you don't want radicalization of the ideology, you don't want hoaxes and lies to be the base of our political process, right?
Yeah.
Because I've seen the videos of, for example, people saying that, if you vote Cap number 1, then Indonesia will be, people having extramarital sex everywhere, or like whatever silly lies that they make up. But so both are happening at the same time, and I think we really need to be aware of this when we talk about young people, because it's not just one type of young people are not one-dimensional, let's say, right? There are various tribes, different corners of Indonesia with very different values. So definitely.
Yeah. And that's definitely, something that I think we should all talk about, right? Like, as you said, there's not one type of young people. I feel like there's an innocence with the youth, right? Like they can swing either ways. They can swing progressive, they can swing conservative. It's about how the conversation is guided. And, it's a double-edged sword because you don't know which way it's going to go. And I think you're right. It's part of society's role to make sure that as we're celebrating diversity, we should also make safeguards against radicalism. And I think it was heartening to hear in the debates where Ma'ruf Amin talked about, let's not spread hoaxes, let's not spread fake news. And I also noted that Sandi was talking a lot about tolerance and about, making sure that we're tolerant with each other and with different groups, which even if it's just campaign speak, I think it's still good for them to say it out loud rather than not.
Right. Yeah, definitely. But so at the same time, I'm also thinking about this book that I've been reading, right? So we tend to talk about radicalization or this difference in ideologies as sometimes not as given, or like sometimes you frame the other side to be ignorant, or they don't read enough, or they're not smart enough.
Yeah. But
I'm reading this moral psychology book by Jonathan Haidt, which talks about how essentially like people have different first draft of moral mind. I know I'm gonna sound very geeky. Just bear with me for a second. People when they were born, there are moral values that are universal for everyone. Like for everyone, it's bad when someone gets killed, or when a little child is being taken care of. It's quite a universal value, right?
Yeah.
But there are other primary moral values where people have very different instincts on, like in-group loyalty or authority, the idea of respecting someone because they're older than you, and the idea of respecting or sanctity or purity. So the idea that something is so pure that nobody should tarnish it. Like you need to defend it. Defend the sanctity of this thing. This thing can be religion, can be virginity, can be, whatever. And in-group loyalty. So these are the values where people are more, have different instincts on, and how people who tend to be progressives tend to be less triggered by, let's say, in-group loyalty, or less triggered by the idea of sanctity, right? But they're more triggered with the idea of fairness and freedom from oppression. So if there are young people in Indonesia who start with very different instincts, this guy have learned moral psychology, or have studied and developed the discipline of moral psychology for a while, he can see that people were born with very different moral instincts, and it's hard to judge the other person just based on where you're coming from, because you have this moral instincts of oppression is bad, and who cares about sanctity of the religion and all that, and you judge the other side, and the other side judged you back for like, oh, these are Western values of whatever you're talking about, liberalism and all that. Whereas for me, it's important that my religion stays protected. I have to defend my God and all that. So they come from very different places, right? And it's important, I think, for us to start the conversation where people try to understand one another better and less about kind of promoting value and expecting the other person to quote unquote read more so that they can understand and be smarter and less ignorant about my values, which is a very one-sided thing, kind of almost. I know I'm blabbering everywhere, but kind of make that point.
No, that's a incredibly important point. Be empathetic, because I think empathy is something that's been lost in the political system, like understanding where the other side is coming from, where others are coming from, where people who didn't vote for you are coming from. Because at the end of the day, whoever is in office has to serve for all of Indonesia, right? And that's something that maybe also the politicians have forgotten. But you're totally right. I think having this kind of conversation, not just talking about who's your favorite candidate, how do you promote that candidate, but also talking about how do we have a safe space where we can talk about all things or from all sides and really listen to one another and not shout over one another, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Obviously, it's less than 30 days now until the election. It's really weird because it feels like it's still a long ways away, but then it's obviously not. And we're at this past round of debate is the third of 5 debates, so we still have 2 more rounds of debates, and there's still going to be a lot of conversation. Obviously, this upcoming weekend, there's going to be the start of the open campaigning period for both camps. So we're going to be talking about this for quite some time now, as we run up to April 17th. Do you have any last words, anything you want to say to our listeners, Afu, before I let you go?
Sure. I think for me, one thing that I always keep in mind, and maybe it's useful for people to have in mind as well when they watch the debate, is that, we shouldn't forget that one is an incumbent and the other is opposition, right? And because of that, I think they have very different burden, like each camp has very different burden that they need to prove or kind of provide in these debates, where, on the one hand, the incumbent, I think, have a really big burden of kind of showing that we have done this and that, and they can't say that, they can't just focus on the future and their plans, because they should have some evidence that some progress have been achieved, right? And on the other hand, the opposition, I think, has an even bigger burden of kind of proving or criticizing what the incumbent has failed to achieve. So when I think when people say that, we need to change the current apa sih hashtag 2019 ganti presiden, right?
Yeah.
Without a solid reason or like solid evidence of what has been successful or not successful during this regime, it's kind of a baseless claim. And people need to think about how a lot of progresses in development often requires more than 5 years to be achieved. So if you already see a positive trend, it makes sense for you to want, the current government to continue and do the same good things that they've been doing. But democracy allows us to change course, and if you really found good evidence that there's been something wrong, because you can find many wrong things too from the current administration, and you want to change the course, then you also need proof, right? First of all, that something's really bad have been going on, and that's why you want to change the course. So when you continue to watch the fourth and fifth debate, just think about this burden of proof and whether both camps are doing a great job based on this division of work, because they are not in the same level of playing field right now. Yeah, food for thought when you watch the upcoming debates.
That's an excellent food for thought, and I can't wait for the upcoming debates, and we'll see how it goes. Thank you so much for being on this episode. I wish we had more time, but obviously we'll just have to bring you back.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be here, and I look forward to be re-invited to the next episode.
Thank you, Afu.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. You can find more information and resources of whatever we talked about on our website, dialogika.id.
Music credits to John Dealey, Lee Roosevelt, and of course, Broke for Free.
If you like what you hear and want to support us, please review our podcast on the Apple Podcast app or whatever app you use to listen to your podcast. And please share our podcast with your friends. It's the best way to spread the word about Dialogika.
If you want to get more involved, we'd love to hear from you. Our email is dialogikapodcast@gmail.com, or just shoot us a message on our Facebook page.
You can also find us on Instagram, YouTube, SoundCloud, and our Twitter. Please follow us on these various platforms. Our Twitter handle is @dialogikapod. Also, follow me on Twitter. It's Steftangk. That's STEPHTANGK.
Thank you again, and see you guys next time.
Bye!